それでは、これより、インド環境教育センター所長のカルティケヤ・サラバイさんに基調講演をお願いいたします。皆様のお手元には同時通訳レシーバーがあるかと思いますので、必要な方はご利用ください。本日インドからお越しいただきました。拍手でお迎えください。サラバイさん、お願いいたします。
Thank you very much. It's always such a pleasure to come and talk to groups in Japan. We have friends and leaders of this whole movement. Japan is the place which started the decade, and I think the world should be thankful for the initiative which has been taken, which we are all equally a part of. I wanted to just, for the first few minutes, take you through a little bit of the journey. Suzuki-san has already done some of that, but I will say that at Rio in 1992, perhaps was the first recognition that education is a key component for promoting sustainable development and improving the capacity of the people to address environment and developmental issues. It has been there earlier, but I think this conference marked somewhat the beginning. If we go back a little bit in history, many of you know that 1972 in Sweden was recognized as the first major international conference drawing attention of mankind to the fact that there was a major crisis on hand. At that time, it was very difficult for the Swedish government to even invite leaders from other parts of the world. In fact, our Prime Minister, then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, was one of the only ones who accepted the invitation in 72. And this is the conference where, for the first time, environment and development were put together. Otherwise, it was somehow seen as two different parts of our reality. The conference in 72 was followed by an important meeting in 1977, also promoted by UNESCO. And it was the first international conference in Tbilisi in Georgia, in then Soviet Union, looking at environmental education. The word ESD was still not there. It was still very much part of environmental education. But this one also really saw that education needs to be lifelong. It is not just something which is confined to the years of school or college, and that it has a major part to play as you move in development. The Johannesburg summit, which has already been mentioned, was when the Japanese Prime Minister, the then Prime Minister, proposed the decade. This has already been talked about. And in 2005, again something which Professor Katsunori Suzuki has mentioned, what many of us felt in the NGO community was that this is not only an initiative of governments, that for the D-ESD to be successful, civil society has to also feel that this is as much their 10 years or decade as it is of government. It's not something which is just a top-down thing. And this was the celebration of this. In fact, as Suzuki-san showed in his slide, the formal inauguration was a little later in New York. But before that, we got together as a group, and several people from here were there. That empowerment of all people, according to the principles of equity and social justice, and action-oriented education is what is required. that it's education. Now you're connecting education with action at this important meeting. I'm skipping some meetings, but in 2007, we also had this conference, and as the representative from UNESCO Japan just said, it was important that the linkage between environmental education and ESD was clarified. Environmental education is not ESD alone, but environmental education has a major role in promoting ESD. Because environmental education, those who went through that, first recognized the problem. But equally, you want the economists, you want the development planners, you want the urban planners, you want the rural development people to get into ESD. But environmental education had a major role, and this is what this conference brought out. And then what was also mentioned was the important conference at Bonn. And again, Bonn emphasized that we need to put this knowledge into action. That knowledge has to be put into action was again emphasized. So I think you see this whole trend from 72 onwards going into the middle of the D-ESD, which is talking about bringing governments and civil society together, talking about education as a lifelong process, talking about education as something which leads to action. Now let's talk a little bit about Asia, which is what today's meeting is about. And we have already talked about the population. We don't know where this number is going to end. It is somewhere up there in 2000 and in 12 billion or 10 billion, depending on what we think it's going to be. But you can see that after the Industrial Revolution, the number has really shot up. Another important concept, which I think we need to understand, is the whole concept of the ecological footprint. It was a concept originally developed by a Swiss son of an agriculture person who looked at everything in terms of land and said that for our lifestyle, how much land is required? For one of us to live, how much land would we require? We require land for growing our food, for growing our clothes, we require land for water, we require land for everything else. And the answer today is something like this. If you see the first line, North America, an average requirement is about 9.5 hectares. Europe, which is also a developed country, is about half of that. The other countries are down, but if you see Asia, that green line, it is very, very low currently. But the horizontal line is the population. If you see, the population is very large, but the line is low. The average which the world can sustain is something like 2. So you can see that line of 2. Maybe I should borrow, Professor Suzuki, can I borrow your pointer? Thank you. So this is the average which the world can do. If you take the whole population of the world, all the area and do it, this is all we can do. Now let's think that these people want a lifestyle like these people. What happens? This is what will happen. That on the globe, if all the green, all the Asia Pacific tries to be this lifestyle, there is no way the world can sustain it. It's in everything. If you take the waste generated, in the US, it's an average of 2 kilos per person per day. It is less in other countries. India, it's hardly anything. If you take use of water, developed countries, some developed countries are in fact doing very well. So it is not that development means more. I've shown this slide to show that in India it is more than some of these countries. So it's not, we waste a lot of water. Use of energy per capita. If you say United States, this is the line for Japan. You can see it going up. Just see what happens with development. Look what's happening in China just now. Look what will happen in India. If we follow the classical pattern, we will all be up here like that big green chart. If you look at the world, suppose you drew a map of the world, which is based on, this is a UNEP map, based on area being measured by GNP, you will have these three blocks. But if you do it by population, the world looks like this. Okay? So you have, if the population world and the previous world, if they merge, you can imagine if all these people start living the lifestyle of that, it is just simply not possible. And therefore, the prediction is that today, we are already using a little more than one world. By 2015, which means when a college student here is my age, it's not too far away. When some of you are my age, we will need 4, and then of course we can have more and more. But I think something which even a school child knows and doesn't require great ESD education is that we have only one planet. This is one of the first photographs of the Earth taken from a satellite. And I think this simple realization, it's simple economics. It does not require, a housewife knows it, a child knows it, that you have so much. It's up to a point, I can take more than others. But when everyone asks for the same, the current situation is not possible. Even if you don't do ESD, we will be forced to do it. But we don't want to go through that pain, and we should do it in this way. In 1928, many, many years ago, Mahatma Gandhi made an interesting comment. He said that if India should take to development like, at that time West meant England, because England was the leading country, we only had 300 million at that time, today we have 1 million, it would strip the world bare like locusts. It's the same comment. The world would be completely finished if a large country like India or China were to use or exploit the world the same way as England did in those days. And at Rio, we were asked to write India's report. And I wrote this, I remember, at 3 o'clock at night when we were wondering what to say. And we said the challenge of development is not how to get there. It's not how to become like that, but how not to. Because every advertisement, every model, every picture, every film is drawing me like a magnet into a certain development style. And how do I do a different style? How does my children do a different style when all of us live in a certain way? And that is a huge, huge challenge. I think this was very nicely said this morning, and I think several speakers spoke about it, that it is not a question of climate change, not a question of biodiversity or water or energy or several other crises we can say. We must realize that it's basically only one thing here. These are only different ways of seeing it. So when we talk about the COP in Nagoya later on biodiversity, ESD for this and ESD for this is not different. Because ESD is for this. ESD is changing something here which will have an impact on all these things. You don't have to have separate ESD, ESD climate change, ESD biodiversity, ESD energy. ESD is to do with human lifestyles. And what is it? It's to do with